The invitation came out of nowhere. Karoline Leavitt, known for her unapologetic fire and rising influence on conservative media circuits, had just finished a speaking tour when the email landed in her inbox. National Cultural Summit, keynote debate panel featuring Denzel Washington, Karoline Leavitt, Dr. Maya Grant, and more. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Denzel Washington, the legendary actor known for powerful roles and equally powerful opinions? What would he possibly gain from sharing a stage with someone the media still labeled as too young to take seriously? But it wasn't a mistake, and Karoline didn't hesitate. The event was being billed as a high-level dialogue on the intersection of culture, politics, and generational identity, streamed live to millions with full national press coverage. For Karoline, it was more than a panel. It was a proving ground. She arrived at the venue early. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Posters outside promoted Clash of Eras as the night's theme. Some were there for Denzel, some were there to boo Karoline. But either way, they were watching. Backstage, the mood was tense. Denzel arrived with quiet confidence, greeting other speakers with his trademark poise. When he shook Karoline's hand, he offered a nod that was polite, but undeniably measured. "You're younger than I expected," he said, cracking a smile. "And you're taller than I expected," Karoline shot back. The tension was instant and mutual. Once on stage, the moderator welcomed the crowd, framing the event as a cross-generational conversation about America's future. But it didn't take long for that conversation to become confrontation. When Karoline challenged Hollywood's role in shaping political narratives, citing entertainment's growing alignment with partisan ideology, Denzel leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "Let me stop you right there," he said into his mic. "With all due respect, little lady, you don't yet understand the power of art. You're playing in a pool you've barely stepped into." The room shifted. Laughter rippled through parts of the audience. Karoline narrowed her eyes, not out of offense, but calculation. She waited for the moderator to regain control. She smiled, and then, calmly and clearly, she leaned into her own mic and said, "Did you just call me little lady on national television?" The crowd stilled. Even Denzel blinked. She continued, "That's cute. I was going to talk about media influence, but now we're going to talk about condescension and what it means when a man with Hollywood power tries to silence a woman with a voice just because he's uncomfortable with her facts." Gasps, applause, phones up, tweets flying. The real debate had just begun, and Karoline wasn't backing down. The moderator's face tightened into a diplomatic smile, clearly not expecting this kind of heat so early in the discussion. But it was too late. The energy in the room had shifted. The cameras zoomed in. The live stream comments exploded. Denzel adjusted his microphone and leaned back slightly, trying to recover the room's rhythm. "Look," he began with a slight laugh, "I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I just think perspective matters, and with age comes experience." Karoline didn't miss a beat. "And with age sometimes comes arrogance," she replied, her voice cool but firm. "You may have experience, Mr. Washington, but that doesn't make your opinion more valid than the millions of young Americans who are told to sit down, shut up, and wait their turn." The audience was no longer passive. People were leaning forward in their seats. Even those who came for Denzel were now listening to Karoline. She wasn't cracking. She was rising. Denzel lifted his hands, offering a performative shrug. "So you're saying young people know more than the people who built the system?" Karoline turned toward him with purpose. "I'm saying young people see the cracks in the system because they weren't the ones who poured the cement." That line hit hard. A visible ripple ran through the panel. Dr. Maya Grant, seated between them, tried to steer the conversation back to the original theme, shared values in a divided culture, but it was no use. This wasn't just a panel anymore. It was a generational showdown, one that had burst wide open on live TV. Denzel, clearly not used to being publicly checked, tried to regain footing by calling Karoline's stance reactionary and fueled by social media attention. Karoline responded without blinking. "You've played heroes on screen, sir. I've stood for truth off screen. There's a difference." Gasps again. A few in the crowd began clapping. The moderator interjected, but neither was backing off. And then came the turning point. Karoline pulled a printed quote from her folder, a real one from a previous interview where Denzel had once said, "Don't confuse movement with progress." She held it up, looked at him directly. "You once said people run in circles thinking they're getting somewhere. But the truth is, some of us were never invited to run. We had to break the circle. That's what I'm doing here. I'm not playing a role. I'm breaking one." The crowd erupted. What had started as a dismissive remark, "Sit down, little lady," was now backfiring live, reshaped into a defining moment of defiance and clarity. And for Karoline, it was only the beginning. The segment ended with the moderator thanking the panelists through a strained smile, barely masking the chaos that had just unfolded. As the applause waned, Karoline stood up, collected her notes, and offered a brief, polite nod toward the crowd. She didn't look at Denzel. She didn't need to, because the real show wasn't over. It was just migrating online. Within minutes, the moment had gone viral. Clips of Denzel saying "little lady" were already circulating with captions like, "He didn't see this clapback coming." Karoline Leavitt just schooled Denzel on live TV. On social media, conservative commentators praised her as fearless and sharp. Liberal voices were divided. Some defended Denzel, others admitted he had underestimated her. Even late-night hosts hinted they'd be talking about the exchange. Karoline sat quietly in the green room, watching the chaos unfold on her phone. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She was already thinking about what came next. Her team rushed in, whispering about media requests, podcast invites, cable news panels. This wasn't just a moment. It was a momentum shift. Meanwhile, Denzel remained in the VIP lounge, surrounded by handlers who were suddenly less confident. His charisma, normally untouchable, had taken a hit, not from scandal, but from exposure. A young staffer approached him and said nervously, "Twitter's, not being kind right now." Denzel exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. He wasn't angry at the backlash. He was stunned by the fact that for the first time in a long while, the script hadn't gone his way. Karoline wasn't a movie character he could control with timing and tone. She was a wild card, and now she had a microphone and a following. That night, every major network ran some version of the headline, "Hollywood meets its match." And in one outlet, a columnist wrote, "This wasn't just about age or gender, it was about who gets to speak and who gets told to sit down." Karoline Leavitt didn't just refuse the seat, she flipped the table. For Karoline, the dust hadn't even settled. And already the ground beneath the conversation had shifted. She wasn't the little lady anymore. She was the one everyone was watching. By the next morning, Karoline's inbox was a battlefield. Some messages full of praise, others dripping with disdain. She knew that going viral meant instant exposure, but also instant enemies. And that was fine with her. She didn't build her career to be liked. She built it to be heard. She stepped into her office early, coffee in hand, scrolling through mentions. The trending hashtag wasn't subtle. # sit down little lady, originally meant to mock her, was now being flipped, reclaimed, and weaponized. Memes flooded the internet. Karoline photoshopped onto famous movie scenes with captions like, "She didn't sit, she stood." One popular tweet read, "You don't tell a woman to sit down unless you're afraid of what she'll say standing up." Meanwhile, Denzel's team was in full damage control. An early morning interview he gave tried to brush it off. "It was just a figure of speech. I respect her courage to show up." But for many, it was too little, too late. The phrase had landed wrong, and the tone had carried weight. This wasn't just about political ideology. It was about power, tone, and entitlement. Later that afternoon, Karoline sat down with a well-known conservative podcast host. The episode was titled, "I Stood." and I spoke. During the interview, she pulled no punches. What bothered me most wasn't the phrase, she said. It was the assumption behind it. That being young means you haven't earned a voice. That being direct makes you a brat. That being female makes you disposable. I've heard all those things before. He just put them in a sentence. The clip hit over 1 million views in hours, and just like that, she wasn't just the girl from the debate anymore. She was the woman who had stared down a cultural icon and refused to flinch. Meanwhile, Denzel's camp debated whether he should release a formal apology, but others advised against it. If you apologize, you legitimize her position, one advisor said. If you don't, you'll keep bleeding online, another countered. He chose silence. But silence in the digital age doesn't stop the noise. That week, Karoline was invited onto every major outlet, some to grill her, some to celebrate her. But all of them recognized one thing. She had shifted the balance. Not with a slogan, not with a campaign, but with one moment, one sentence and one refusal to stay quiet. And somewhere in the background, Denzel watched and learned a hard truth. Sometimes the real script gets written by the person you tried to silence. 3 days had passed, and the echo of Karoline's words still hadn't faded. Cable news panels continued to replay the exchange, dissecting tone, intent, and cultural impact like it was a State of the Union address. But behind the scenes, a shift was brewing, one that Karoline expected. When you speak too boldly, someone always tries to shut the mic off. On the fourth morning, her comms director rushed into her office, face pale. There's a letter. From the Diversity Council, Karoline raised an eyebrow. A letter? They're calling for your speaking engagements to be canceled, citing divisive conduct and age-inappropriate rhetoric. They claim you created a hostile environment for Denzel. Karoline blinked, then laughed, once. So now standing up for myself is hostile? The irony was almost laughable. The very people who preached inclusion and free expression were trying to deplatform her because she refused to play the obedient underdog. But Karoline didn't panic. She prepared. Within hours, she recorded a sharp, polished response, not from anger, but clarity. In front of a crisp backdrop and flanked by 2 American flags, she stared into the camera. I didn't insult anyone. I didn't scream, protest, or walk out. I simply refused to be dismissed. If that threatens someone's comfort, maybe it's their comfort that needs inspection, not my voice. She paused. You don't get to silence a woman just because she didn't clap for the narrative. The video racked up 3.7 million views in 12 hours. Support poured in, not just from conservatives, but from unexpected voices. Gen Z influencers, moderate feminists, even a few progressive writers who admitted, off-record, that Denzel had crossed a line. Meanwhile, Denzel's publicist issued a vague statement about mutual respect and misunderstood tone. But the damage was done. Every attempt to paint Karoline as immature or reactive only highlighted the truth. She had been calm, articulate, and unapologetically strong, and she wasn't backing down. That night, she took the stage at a youth summit, scheduled before the debate, now transformed into something electric. The crowd rose before she even spoke. She stood at the podium, eyes sharp. They told me to sit down. I stood. They tried to cancel me. I showed up louder. Let me be clear on if they think this ends with a hashtag, they haven't met me yet. Thunderous applause. Karoline wasn't just surviving the moment. She was owning it. And every day the story stayed alive, it shifted from debate drama to something more dangerous for her critics. Momentum. The energy in the room was electric, but it wasn't hype. It was hunger. Young conservatives, moderates, even curious independents filled the auditorium. They weren't just there to hear Karoline speak. They were there because she had become something rare in modern politics. A voice that didn't blink. That night she didn't need flashy rhetoric. She simply told the story. How a Hollywood legend tried to reduce her to a punchline. how the media tried to spin her composure into emotional overreaction, and how she responded, not by yelling, not by playing victim, but by taking the moment back. Meanwhile, in another part of the country, Denzel sat down for a closed-door interview with a high-profile magazine, hoping to redirect the narrative, but it didn't go well. He called Karoline's response disproportionate, said the backlash was the result of performative outrage, and questioned whether someone so young should be interpreting cultural intent on a national stage. The headline that followed? Denzel doubles down, Karoline responds. And she did. Quickly. Within hours, her team released a sharp statement. The issue here isn't cultural interpretation, it's cultural permission. You don't need a Hollywood resume to know when someone's trying to shut you up. I didn't interpret that moment. I lived it. The online reaction was swift and one-sided. Even public figures who had remained quiet began posting in her defense. Some reframed the debate as a gender issue. Others saw it as generational. But everyone agreed on one thing. Karoline wasn't just reacting, she was leading. And then came the invitation that proved it. A major Sunday political show, one known for its elite-only roundtables, requested her as the featured guest, not to comment, to set the tone. Her team hesitated. The host wasn't friendly, the network had mocked her in the past. But Karoline didn't flinch. If I only speak where I'm safe, she said, I'm not really speaking. So she went. And when the cameras rolled, she didn't wait for softballs. She tackled the issue head on. This was never about Denzel. It was about what happens when someone powerful thinks they can define your place, and you say no thanks. The host asked if she thought she overreacted. She smiled. Overreaction is shouting. I just stood up. That clip alone hit 5 million views in 2 days. It was official now. Karoline Leavitt wasn't a headline. She was the conversation. And her momentum? Unstoppable. What had started as a fiery panel exchange had now morphed into a full-blown cultural moment. And Karoline Leavitt was at the center of it. But what made it so powerful wasn't just her words. It was the way the country reacted to them. Across campuses, students started quoting her line, I didn't interpret that moment. I lived it. It showed up on shirts, in TikToks, in bold white text, across black backgrounds on Instagram stories. A voice, once considered too young, too green, too disruptive, was now reshaping the tone of generational debate. Denzel's team tried one more move. His publicist announced that he would be delivering a statement on grace at a private gala celebrating arts and justice. A veiled attempt to both acknowledge the backlash and reassert control over the narrative. But the speech, which was supposed to project humility and wisdom, came off rehearsed, carefully worded, and above all, safe. We must all be willing to listen even when the voices are unexpected, he said. Even when they challenge us. The media gave it light praise, but the public saw through it. Meanwhile, Karoline was being booked solid. From talk shows to podcasts, college events to major conferences. What set her apart wasn't just her ability to speak, it was her refusal to fold and her mastery of turning backlash into firepower. At one college appearance, a student asked her bluntly, Do you think Denzel still sees you as a little lady? She grinned. If he does, I hope he enjoys the view. From behind me. The crowd went wild. But it wasn't all laughs. She began delivering deeper messages, too, about generational arrogance, institutional gatekeeping, and the selective way respect is offered to voices that don't follow the script. Respect should never be a reward for obedience, she said during a viral speech. It should be the starting point of dialogue, not the finish line you earn for staying quiet. By this point, even mainstream outlets that once treated her as a fringe figure started changing their tone. They didn't necessarily agree with her, but they could no longer ignore her. And as for Denzel, he quietly declined several public debates, avoided follow-up interviews on the topic, and canceled his appearance at a university forum on generational dialogue, citing schedule conflicts. Privately, insiders said it all boiled down to one fact. He had underestimated her, and now the world had watched her turn that miscalculation into a movement. By the end of the month, Karoline Leavitt had become more than just a political voice. She had become a cultural checkpoint, not because of a carefully managed campaign, not because of years in the system, but because of one simple, undeniable reality. She didn't back down. National newspapers began writing profiles, not about her resume, but about the phenomenon she had sparked. Time, Politico, Vanity Fair, each with a different spin, but all dancing around the same truth. She's what happens when the script gets flipped. What had once been a viral moment was now a narrative shift, and for many it was more than generational. It was philosophical, because the real story wasn't that Denzel said something wrong, it was that Karoline responded right. Meanwhile, conservative circles fully embraced her as a rising star, not just because she challenged the left, but because she did it without mimicry, without caricature, without rage. She was calm, unapologetic, precise, and that combination terrified her critics more than any slogan. Denzel, for his part, pulled back from interviews. His advisors pushed a rebranding strategy, focusing on international philanthropy and legacy projects. The goal? Shift the conversation away from Karoline. But it was too late, because now other young women were stepping up, quoting Karoline, referencing that infamous debate moment and using it as fuel for their own platforms. The echo was real. On the 30th day after the event, Karoline gave a keynote speech titled "The Power of the Stand." "A moment of disrespect," she said, "can only define you if you sit with it. I chose to stand, and I'm not standing alone anymore." The room exploded. She didn't mention Denzel's name once. She didn't need to, because now this wasn't about him anymore. It was about a new kind of leadership, one that didn't need a title, a legacy, or approval, just a voice, and the courage to use it. As she walked off stage, her phone buzzed with a message from a woman she had never met, a schoolteacher from rural Iowa. "Thank you, I didn't know I was allowed to speak until I saw you refuse to sit." Karoline stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked it, lifted her chin, and walked into her next interview. The culture had shifted, and she was the one who moved it. Karoline's rise wasn't just enduring, it was accelerating. With every media appearance, speech, and post, her audience grew. But with growth came challenge. And this time, the pushback wasn't subtle. A group of Hollywood insiders launched a campaign called Restore Civility, a carefully branded initiative that, without naming her directly, accused new political voices of promoting confrontation over compassion. The press tried to spin it as a call for unity, but Karoline saw it for what it was, a reset attempt by the old guard. And at the center of it was Denzel, quietly funding the campaign through a foundation, hoping to reverse the tide without wading back into the storm. Karoline didn't wait to be named. She stepped forward. At a town hall in Charlotte, standing in front of a crowd that had waited in line for hours, she opened with surgical precision. When power speaks of civility, what it often means is compliance. They don't want peace, they want silence dressed in soft words. Gasps, applause, phones up, cameras rolling. "I'm not here to be sweet, I'm here to be clear." Within hours, the quote was everywhere, spliced over music, printed on shirts, blasted on social media by supporters and skeptics alike. And while the Hollywood crowd doubled down on their decency narrative, it backfired. Because people remembered what Karoline had actually done. She stood her ground. She didn't shout. She didn't insult. She just refused to be dismissed. Even major network anchors who once downplayed her began acknowledging the truth on air. Whether you agree with her or not, Karoline Leavitt has changed the tone. And she's done it with clarity, not chaos. The game had changed, and this time, Denzel's side was the one struggling to keep up. Karoline's speeches began drawing bipartisan interest. Young independents, moderate liberals, and even apolitical audiences were tuning in, not because they agreed with every word, but because they respected the stance, and it became clear. This wasn't about right or left anymore. It was about who gets to speak, and who gets told to sit down. Karoline had been told to sit. She stood. Now she wasn't just defending that choice, she was inspiring others to do the same. 2 months after the viral moment that started it all, Karoline Leavitt stood on a stage far bigger than any she had faced before, the National Forum on Civic Dialogue, a televised event typically reserved for seasoned lawmakers, media elites, and former presidents. She wasn't invited at first, but public demand changed that. Even networks that had previously dismissed her couldn't ignore the numbers. She was now pulling in more online engagement than most sitting senators. And unlike many, she wasn't being followed for controversy. She was being followed for conviction. She arrived in a navy suit, no notes, no entourage, just her voice. Across the table from her, surrounded by cameras and live streaming feeds, sat some of the most powerful figures in media and politics. And at the center, Denzel Washington. Yes, he came. Yes, he knew it was risky. But what no one knew was this. Karoline had requested it. She wasn't afraid of the moment. She had been built by it. The moderator asked the question everyone waited for. Ms. Leavitt, if you could revisit that moment when Mr. Washington told you to sit down, would you respond the same way? Karoline didn't blink. No. A pause. The room tensed. I'd respond sooner. A wave of gasps. The crowd erupted. Because the problem isn't just one comment from one person. It's that we keep telling people, especially young women, to earn their space by being quiet first. I didn't earn mine by staying silent. I earned it by refusing to. Denzel looked up. For the first time in weeks, he nodded slightly. A gesture of respect. Maybe even understanding. Karoline turned to him. You don't have to like what I said, but I'm going to keep saying it because it's mine to say. The moderator moved on, but the moment was sealed. By the end of the event, social media was ablaze again. Only this time it wasn't anger or outrage, it was recognition. Karoline Leavitt had walked into the lion's den and didn't just survive, she redefined the whole arena. She didn't ask for permission, she claimed the mic and never gave it back. They told her to sit. She stood. They tried to silence her. She spoke louder. Karoline Leavitt didn't just win a debate, she changed the rules. And when history looks back at that moment, it won't remember the dismissal. It will remember the stand.